Welcome to another hands-on lab. So in this lab, what we're going to do is create an AWS Global Accelerator, and we're going to create two instances of an application in two different regions and then direct our traffic and see what happens. So what we're going to create is very much like what you see here. We'll actually create a region in US East 1 with an ALB. We'll create a region in AP Southeast 2 with an ALB, and behind each of those ALBs will just be a single EC2 instance with an HTTP website running. We'll then create a global accelerator with the two regions attached, and then we're going to connect to it. Now I'm actually in Australia, so I'll be connecting to it from Australia. So what I should see is that I get directed to AP Southeast 2, and then we're going to cause a failure, and we're going to see if we get directed all the way over to US East 1 automatically. So that's how it works, and optionally you can also use Route 53. You don't need to for this lab, it doesn't make a huge amount of difference. We can just use the DNS name of the global accelerator, but if you want to, you can also create an entry if you already have a hosted zone. So just create an alias record like we did in the ALB and NLB lessons, and point it instead to a global accelerator rather than a load balancer. So this is what we're going to do. Let's head over to the console and start building it out. I'm in the EC2 management console in North Virginia, and what I'm going to do is launch an instance. As always, it's going to be a Linux 2 AMI. I'm going to use a T2 micro. Now, what you do need to do is, I'm happy with the default VPC. We don't need to change anything there. I'm just going to come down to IAM role. We've got this S3 read-only role that we used earlier, and we're going to use some user data again. So as with before, this is the stuff that we used from the Route 53 section of the course. So go into your course download, code, Route 53, user data Route 53. And the only thing you need to modify is this here. You need to make sure that you change your bucket. So here, my bucket's called DCT Labs. You need to change your bucket name to whatever you created back in that section, and make sure you've still got that index.txt file in there, all from the course download. So let's copy this code. Come back, paste the code in, and click on next. We need to make sure we have a security group with port 80 open. I'm just going to call this web access, and let's add a rule for HTTP, and that's going to come from anywhere, so that's good. And I'll just copy this for making it neat and tidy. And then let's just review and launch this instance. That's the instance being launched. Now let's head down to load balancers, and we're going to create a load balancer. I'm going to create load balancer. It's going to be application load balancer. I'll call it my ALB. It needs to have a HTTP listener, so we just accept the defaults. I'm not sure which availability zone my instance is in, so I'm just going to add all of these in. And there's only one subnet in the default VPC in each of these availability zones, so that's all fine. Now we can actually create the accelerator right here. So let's just choose create an accelerator, and I'm going to call this my GA. Let's click on next, go through the security, and make sure we choose that web access security group. Under routing, we're going to create a new target group called TG1. If you already have one in this region, then just call it something else. And you can see that we've got the protocol selected as HTTP port 80. That's all good. No need to change anything there. I will change the health check settings. Now, the healthy threshold is the number of successful responses to a health check request that are required before the instance is considered healthy. I want to speed things up. I'm going to put that to 2. And the interval is going to be 10 seconds. Unhealthy threshold is 2 as well. That's fine. Let's click on next. And here we can see we have a target. If we select it, click add to registered, and it should pop onto the box at the top here. And then let's go through and create the load balancer. So that's good. And we're going to do the same in another site in a moment. Now I'd like to just check that my instance is successfully working. So let's just copy this public IP address. And what we're going to do is just check that we can access the web page. And it's been generated successfully, so we know that the code worked. It loaded the website and configured this page for us. And we can see that this particular instance is running in US East 1E. So if we come back to EC2, we should find, if we go to target groups, that we've got a healthy instance, and we do. And so our load balancer should now also be working, and we should be able to connect to the DNS name of the load balancer. So again, let's check that out. And yes, that works. We're still going to that EC2 instance. So now let's set up our second site. For this, we're going to head to Sydney. Now you can use a region that's closest to you. I'm just using one that's closest to me. Amazon Linux 2, T2 Micro. Again, make sure you change your IAM role, paste your user data, and then let's click through to security group. Again, we need to make sure we've got a security group. We don't have one here. So let's create one called web access. And then we're just going to add that rule for HTTP. And that's coming from anywhere. That's great. And let's go through, launch the instance. In this case, I don't have a key pair. So I'm just going to call this one syd-kp-mgmt. So I know which account it's from. And let's launch those instances. So just one instance actually. So we've got that instance. Let's come down to load balancers, create a load balancer, application load balancer, call it my ALB. Same thing, we're going to enable the availability zones, all of the ones we have, HTTP protocol. That's all good. We've already got a global accelerator. We don't need to create another one. Let's click on next, go through the security, select our security group, go to routing, new target group TG1. Again, we leave all the defaults here, and I'm just going to change these health check settings. Reduce my healthy threshold to 2 and my interval to 10. Register targets. We've got a target here. Let's select it, add to registered, and then go through and create the load balancer. So that looks good. Let's come back up. I want to test my instance again. So let's just copy its IP, paste that into our browser. And we've got an instance in AP Southeast 2B. And then I want to do the same with my load balancer, but it's still provisioning, so I'll give it a minute or two, and then that should be provisioned shortly. Now, while that's happening, we can go to Global Accelerator. So let's search for Global Accelerator, open this console, and we can see that we have a Global Accelerator called MyGA. We can see its static IP addresses and also its DNS name, and it's deployed. Let's click on the name on the left here. And now you see a bit more information, and you can see the listener. So we've got a listener on port 80, and we have an endpoint group for US East 1. So that's where we already have our instance running behind a load balancer, and that's healthy. So let's actually go into the listener, and what we want to do is add an endpoint group. You can see at the moment we've got one endpoint group for US East 1, and the traffic dial is 100%. So you can play around with weightings using these traffic dials to send certain volumes of traffic to one region or another. We're going to add an endpoint group. We're going to choose the region. In this case, for me, it's AP Southeast 2. For you, it's whichever region you deployed your second instance into. I'm going to leave the traffic dial as it is, click on next, and let's save. So we now have multiple endpoints configured. If we go back up to our listener, and let's just have a look at the status, it says they're all healthy. So what I'm going to do is copy this DNS name. So this is the DNS name for Global Accelerator. This DNS name will resolve to these static Anycast IP addresses. Let's put this into a browser and let's hit it. Now, I've been directed to US East 1E, but I'm in Australia, so that's a long way from where I am. So I suspect that that just means that we don't actually have our endpoint fully ready yet for the AP Southeast 2 region. So what I'm going to do is give it a minute, and then we're going to try again. So I've given it a minute, and it still seems to be directing me to US East 1E. So sometimes it will just stick you to wherever you resolve to, as long as that endpoint is healthy. Now, what I want to do now is actually simulate a failure. So what we're going to do is back in North Virginia here, I'm going to go to security groups, choose the security group associated with my default VPC, the one that I just created for this particular exercise. So that should be this one here. I'm going to edit inbound rules, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to remove this rule that allows HTTP using IPv4. I might as well remove that one as well. So let's just save those rules. Let's go down to target groups, and what we should find is that our target becomes unhealthy fairly quickly. So we set our unhealthy threshold to 2 and the interval to 10 seconds. So within the next 30 seconds or so, we should find that this turns unhealthy. That instance is now showing as unhealthy because the health checks have failed because the port is not open. So let's go back and see if we can connect to a different Global Accelerator endpoint. I've just hit refresh, and as you can see, there's nothing on my screen. It's literally just hanging. So this means that even though the target group has an unhealthy instance, which means the load balancer isn't going to be directing traffic to it. It seems Global Accelerator is not aware of that yet. So we need Global Accelerator to pick that change up, and then it will start directing us to the other site. So let's try that again. And now we do get redirected to the instance in AP Southeast 2B. So it can take a little bit of time to fail over, which is why you do need to make sure you configure your health checks properly. So we have the listener here, we have the endpoints for each of our regions. And if we go into the endpoint, click on edit, you'll see we did have some health check information here as well. So again, we've got a health check interval here. You can play around with that. You've got the health check for your target behind your application load balancer, and then you've got the health check here. So you need to make sure you configure your intervals and your threshold counts accordingly to make sure that your applications can fail over quickly. So that's it. We've finished in this lesson, and all we need to do now is go in and delete our Global Accelerator. Click on delete, and what you have to do is disable the accelerator, and then you need to wait for several minutes. Once it's disabled, you can then type delete and delete your accelerator. So that's my accelerator disabled. I'm just going to type delete, and that will be deleted for me. And the only thing to do now is make sure you go back in and delete your application load balancers and terminate your instances, and then you'll be all cleaned up.